For people who are transgender, and that includes non-binary people, there's a lot of re-education and reconstruction necessary after you come out as your true gender, because you start to realize all of the ways you've been socialized into a specific gender throughout your life, and you have to start to consciously deconstruct some of those and rebuild parts of your identity. And a lot of that has to do with your personality, the way that you express yourself and carry yourself, but it also has to do with the clothing that you wear. If you were assigned a specific sex at birth, like most people are, it's very likely that you were socialized into a certain role. So once you come out, you have to relearn those things. And a lot of times it means changing up your style. I'm non-binary, which means I have experience coming out as non-binary and finding clothes that feel affirming to me. So that's what I'm going to talk about specifically in this video. But wherever you identify on the gender spectrum, there might be some interesting tidbits to help you understand the way that you show up in the world. So first I want to talk about 5 principles of clothing to help us understand the landscape of clothing and why we put clothing into certain gender buckets. And then I will help you figure out what you actually like in terms of your style and show you how that has worked for me. Rule number 1 is that there are no rules. I will talk about some of the ways that we have built up these understandings of gender through clothing, but at the end of the day, clothing is just fabric. All of the social stuff, like while it exists, is also not that serious. Like you can do whatever you want. And you have to also remember that the lens through which I will be talking about clothes is a very like modern Western lens. In other cultures and throughout our history, the idea of which clothing is considered masculine, which clothing is considered feminine has changed a lot. Several centuries ago, for example, men often wore things that are now considered to be very feminine. Things like tunics and long shirts that looked like skirts, long curled hair. All of these things were commonly worn by men until maybe the 13th, 14th century, when things like tailoring became a symbol of status and just grew in popularity from there. So understanding that like the people that we go out and interact with and the expectations we've built around clothes are only a tiny portion of historically like all of the different roles that clothes have played. If you ever feel insecure, just remember that it's not that serious. Rule number 2 is that cuts of clothing matter a lot. When it comes to whether an outfit will be perceived as masculine or feminine, a big part of that is the way the outfit is cut. The outfit I have on today is very baggy, straight leg pants and a loose fitting long sleeve t-shirt. Both of these were marketed towards men, were found in the men's section, and generally give off a more boyish masculine feel. And in addition to the cut, the shape also matters a lot, because what you'll find is that in a lot of masculine clothing, like this suit jacket that I have on, there are sharper, harder lines, like harder edges. These kind of squared off sharp lines in the suit, the triangle lapels, all of that stuff gives off a more masculine vibe than a lot of traditionally feminine clothing. And you can contrast that with the shape and cut of a woman's piece of clothing, or at least a piece of clothing that is like marketed toward women. You can see that immediately the cut is typically a lot lower cut. It's curved at the side, so a little bit more accentuating. It's curved at the bottom. Overall, like this outfit, which both of these pieces would be found in the women's section, is a lot softer. It's a lot more like rounded and just gives off a more soft kind of feminine vibe. Rule number 3 is that the fit of clothes matters too. So it's not only about the cut and the shape of the clothing, but it's also about how tight or how loose it is. Generally speaking, similar to how clothes marketed toward women tend to have softer lines and more curves, they also tend to be a little bit more fitted. Now, as a non-binary person, I often have dysphoria around my body. So my tendency is to go for looser, baggier pieces of clothing. But a lot of times that actually is more masculine when I would prefer to show up as more feminine. And so if that's like you, sometimes you just kind of have to lean into that discomfort and embrace what you have. Because a tight shirt like this gives off a much more feminine vibe than traditional men's cut of t-shirts, which are like lower down on the arm, again, like just looser arms, looser through the body. But if that's what you're going for, then definitely shop in the men's section. But I might actually be needing to bring the skinny jeans back into rotation. Rule number 4 is that it really matters how much skin you're showing. For whatever reason, men are just not comfortable showing a lot of parts of themselves. And so I think like a hoodie that you can buy in the men's section is a great example of a lot of what I've talked about. A lot of times it's something I reach for personally because I feel dysphoria around my body and because frankly, it's comfortable. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I also have to acknowledge that something like a hoodie is generally more masculine presenting than some of the more feminine clothing items I own. So not only is it baggy, loose cut, you can't really see the shape of my body, but you also really can't see much of me except my head sticking out the top. And this is contrasted with this women's shirt that I was just wearing, which not only has like a much deeper neckline, but also has this kind of floral lace pattern that shows some skin through. And of course, like all of these things, there are problematic aspects to the fact that we consider certain things to be masculine and feminine. So I am not trying to continue to uphold those, but I am acknowledging that if you want to appear either more feminine or more masculine in the way that you present yourself, these are some of the things that you need to keep in consideration. And rule number 5, which may be the most important, is that hair and accessories go a long way in your gender presentation. I would argue that these are actually more important than the clothing that you wear because the way you do your hair and the accessories you have on can really change the entire look in a way that just like changing one piece of clothing can't. Let me give you an example. When we're talking about hair, the same principles as clothes apply. If you desire to appear more feminine, you need to have softer lines. You need to use your hair in a way that softens the natural angles of your face. And if you want to appear more masculine, you should look at harder lines. So that's why things like a fade on the sides are more common in masculine haircuts. For me personally, I like to appear more feminine. So that's why I have bangs and my hair down. If I have my hair like this, which is kind of how I used to wear my hair when it was a little bit shorter in the middle part, it looks a lot more masculine. The fact that you can see my eyebrows and my forehead and giving more masculine. And then immediately, like if I fix my bangs and make it look soft, it looks less masculine. Same thing, like if I go to put my hair up, which I can't really do right now, it's not long enough, but like this looks extremely masculine. But if I were to like go to put my hair up and kind of leave my bangs, it's messy, but you get the idea. Like it generally still looks a lot more feminine. The way you accessorize is important too, whether that's things like piercings and tattoos that are permanently part of you or things like jewelry that you put on. I have a lot of beads and like bracelets. All of that tends to be more feminine. A lot of times if you're thinking about masculine accessories, it's either wearing like nothing, wearing just a single watch or a single bracelet, like very simple, understated looks. Now, I do want to emphasize that these are all generalizations. When we're talking about gender roles, what society considers to be masculine and feminine is inherently tied to how you're perceived, and no one has to stick to these categories. Men can wear things that are considered feminine, women can wear things that are considered masculine, and especially for non-binary people, it can be really affirming to combine both elements. For example, I love the small shirt, big pants combo, like a tight cardigan like this with a baggy pair of pants. Something that I've heard often within the creative world, specifically surrounding filmmaking, is that you have to learn the rules to be able to break them. In other words, if you don't really know the rules and you're breaking them, most of the time it might just look sloppy, but if you know the rules and have learned the system, you can then break it in a way that conveys a specific message. So I think it's really helpful to learn the rules of what's masculine and feminine and then make decisions about how you want to break it in a way that feels affirming to you. So how do you actually figure out what style you want to go for as a non-binary person? The way that I like to think about changing your style is self-awareness without judgment. Because a lot of times when you're changing your aesthetic, you'll find other people who fit that aesthetic, or you'll find role models that you want to look like, and you'll start processing everything you want to wear through the lens of what they would wear. To me, what this looks like is figuring out your motivation, your feelings, your preferences, and your physical body habitus. Your motivation being, what is the goal of changing your style? For me personally, when I started to think about changing my style after I came out as non-binary, it meant better aligning the way that I show up in the world with the way that I felt inside. As long as I feel good about how I look in the mirror, about what I step out of the house wearing, I don't care if people misgender me or don't see me as non-binary. It's all about my self-expression. And then number 2 is, what are your feelings around clothing and style? Previously, I would have written down dysphoria, that when I put on my clothes and look in the mirror, when I style my hair, that doesn't feel like the person I am inside. And on the flip side, when you're trying on clothes, start to think about how they make you feel, not just how you look or how you think you should present yourself, but how do you actually feel when you're wearing the clothes? And the third question for self-awareness is, what are your preferences? It's great to just like take stock of what you've worn previously, so that way when you go shopping or when you're at the thrift store, it becomes a lot easier to focus on where you actually like to shop. The question is like, is your preference something baggy that hides your body, or is it something tighter that shows more of your body? Do you prefer certain materials or certain colors? When it comes to your jewelry, do you have preferences for certain materials? Do you like silver or gold? Do you like chunkier or more understated? As you write down how certain clothing items make you feel and what your feeling towards style is, and then write down your preferences of here's what I like and here's what I don't like, you start to get a clear picture of what your sense of style actually is. And then the last question to ask yourself are, what are the physical traits that I need to keep in mind when I'm building a sense of style? When I think about my physical characteristics, for example, I know that I have a pretty defined jawline, and that tends to be a more masculine trait. So when I think about like styling my hair, a lot of it is just like how to soften the sharp lines of my face. And another thing for me is like, I have a lot of hair on my body that I haven't really done anything about. So when I wear something with a lower cut, a lot of times it sticks out, which means like I need to either shave my neck or be okay with showing more hair. All of the physical parts of your body can either be things that you change, or they're potentially limiting factors to wearing certain types of outfits. And then from there, it's a great idea to go thrifting, because not only is that so much better for the environment than buying new clothes when there's so much textile waste out there, but it also allows you to try things on in a very low pressure environment. Or you can buy something you think you like for like $2 or $3, bring it home, wear it, and see how it feels.
So with all that said, here's my current sense of style and how I got here. Most of what I wear right now is kind of like corporate alternative. This is a women's cardigan. It's a lot of black and gray colors, but it's pretty understated and it's appropriate for a corporate environment like I work at. After I get off or on weekends, I'll typically reach for band tees or vintage printed tees, baggier jeans, things with more prints or a little bit more character, those types of things. My fashion journey has certainly not been linear. Through high school, I didn't care a whole lot about how I looked and how I presented myself. And once I got to college, I started to kind of get more into like artistic and creative pursuits, started making videos again, started going to cinema studies classes, and I became a little bit more interested in how I styled myself. And what felt right at the time was kind of like a streetwear skater style. I'm pretty bad at skating, but I wore a lot of like ripped jeans, skater shoes. Wasn't particularly inventive or creative, but at the time, that's the style that I gravitated toward. From there, I started to thrift a lot. My favorite things were just like vintage graphic crew necks and t-shirts. I kind of got tired of like the skin tight spray on type of jeans. Most of the clothes I buy are thrifted or secondhand online. And it is still a lot of those elements of like vintage style clothes that I really like. So at this point, it's taken that style and made it a little bit more about self-expression, especially in terms of the message that my clothes are presenting. Whether it's wearing clothes that obviously came from the women's section or wearing jewelry that gives a more feminine look, whether that's painting my nails or being more direct with my message. I have a pair of patch pants that I'm working on DIYing together that has political messages all over it. I have some buttons that have political messages, or even just the types of bands that I listen to that are punk and anti-establishment. This combination of subtle messaging of influences from alt and punk subculture with just kind of a clean like look that's a little bit more feminine has been the middle where I've kind of settled. So if you're non-binary like me, fashion is complicated and it's going to involve a lot of unlearning and relearning to find a place where you truly feel comfortable. But as non-binary people, we know that feeling deeply because that is kind of what it's like to show up in the world with a non-binary gender identity. If you are non-binary or trans and you've been exploring your fashion sense, I would love to hear what gives you euphoria, what makes you feel affirmed, And who knows, maybe I'll get some ideas for what I try next. Thanks for tuning in.